Ross Caputi, first of all, then, why are you sorry for the role you played in Fallujah?
Well, what we did to Fallujah, I don't think anyone in my unit ever would have condoned doing to their own family. It was completely brutal. We forced about 200,000 people out of their homes, and they had to make do. They either had to go live in the desert or find some neighboring village that would shelter them and just make do in any way that they can. We completely dehumanized the population of Fallujah. The corporate media claimed that it had been taken over by terrorists and dead-enders and anti-Americans, and that they were the backbone of the insurgency, and that we were going to come in, sweep through, and so-called liberate the city of Fallujah. In doing so, we destroyed a major portion of the city, turned it into complete rubble. We killed thousands of civilians, and it's very possible that the weapons we used caused a really serious health crisis that the people of Fallujah are suffering from today. There are huge rates of birth defects and cancers in the city right now.
But how was that justified at the time? What were you told you were fighting for? Was there a coherent argument other than simply this is just for the general battle?
I think it was coherent, but it was a lie. It said what my command told us is that terrorists had taken over the city of Fallujah, and they had some sort of irrational hatred for America. It had nothing to do with our foreign policy. It had nothing to do with the fact that we illegally invaded Iraq and were occupying it against the wishes of the Iraqi population.
And wars where you have foreign invaders coming in who are culturally, linguistically, and historically illiterate, i.e. they are unable to speak the language. They are unable to communicate with those they are occupying other than through the language of force, are always the dirtiest types of wars. You're fighting an elusive enemy who you can rarely see. This creates, in the words of the psychiatrist Robert J. Lifton, atrocity-producing situations where you take casualties either from an IED or from a lightning ambush. You can't actually strike back against the perpetrators, and so you begin to lash out at the civilian population around you. And of course, as you just heard, this is precisely what happened in Fallujah, but also in many other parts of Iraq. And these wars become one huge atrocity. Wars always involve murder, and by that I mean the taking of a life of somebody who does not have the capacity to harm you as opposed to killing. But in wars of occupation like these, it's primarily about murder. There's actually very little killing.
Well, in the case of the second siege of Fallujah, my command actually lied to us. They knew perfectly well that there were still civilians in the city. That was a lie. There were thousands of civilians in the city at the time. And they told us to basically use any force that was necessary. So we were using completely indiscriminate tactics like reconnaissance by fire, which is when, if you don't know there's something in a building, you fire into it. If you hear wailing and screaming after, that means there are people in the building, and then you act accordingly. We were doing things like bulldozing entire neighborhoods. Tactics like this that were completely indiscriminate, and I'm sure killed plenty of innocent civilians.
Every time an incident like this, including Abu Ghraib, comes up, what they try and do is disconnect it from the pattern. And that is what Layla El-Anari and I did when we interviewed these 50 combat vets who had returned from Iraq in collateral damage, to talk about the pattern of atrocities, that at checkpoints, at raids, detentions, every time they laid down suppressing fire when an IED went off, you had tremendous civilian casualties, and nobody ever went back and counted, and nobody went back and looked. And so what they'll try and do is isolate the event. And I think Americans have effectively been kept, certainly the broader public, from seeing that Iraq, like the war in Vietnam, has just been one long atrocity.
1/3 of combat veterans who served in Iraq, we understand, experienced depression or post-traumatic stress disorder, according to a study done last year by the US Army. A leading cause of PTSD is guilt that troops experience due to moral dilemmas faced in combat, according to a new US military study of active duty Marines. And veterans who've served in Iraq and Afghanistan are more likely to take their own lives than those who served in other wars, according to a study by the University of Georgia.
I think that speaks volumes about the nature of this war. As Mr. Hedges described, this is a war of atrocity. We're not building schools and hospitals like the corporate media would tell us sometimes. People people do not go home and want to kill themselves because they've been helping Iraqis. They go home and want to kill themselves because they've committed atrocities and they can't live with it.
This has not, in any sense of the word, been a victory. Peace and prosperity have not been visited, much less democracy, upon Iraq. These armed factions are still going at each other's throats. Disintegration, I think, is very likely. So it's a kind of messy withdrawal. We've walked away from a situation which finally, number one, where we weren't wanted. That's the only reason we left. And number two, we couldn't handle it financially or physically.
Chris Hedges, thank you very much. One last thought.
Saying that bad things happen in war. These sort of things just happen. Collateral damage is a fact of war. War is not a moral agent. It's not capable of maiming and killing human beings. Human beings kill other human beings. And that sort of language is a cop-out. Veterans like myself, we need to own what we've done, and we can't put it off on abstract concepts like war. And that's a first step to doing something sensible about these wars.